Welcome to Horror Stories, where we bring you the most spine-chilling tales. In today's video, we present 3 true disturbing cabin horror stories. Get ready for real-life encounters of eerie disappearances, ghostly apparitions, and unexplained phenomena in isolated cabins. Turn off the lights, sit back, and let the horror unfold. The first story is The Vanishing Woodsman. In the fall of 1987, a seasoned woodsman named David decided to spend a week in his family's remote cabin in the Pacific Northwest. This cabin had been a part of his family for generations, used for hunting and as a retreat from the hustle and bustle of city life. It was isolated, surrounded by dense forests, with no neighbors for miles. David arrived on a crisp October afternoon, eager for a week of solitude and hunting. The first few days were uneventful, filled with the usual routine of chopping wood, scouting the area, and enjoying the quiet. But on the third night, things took a disturbing turn. As David was preparing to sleep, he heard a faint, rhythmic tapping coming from outside. He dismissed it as a branch against the cabin wall and went to bed. The tapping continued for the next few nights, growing louder and more insistent. One night, it became so loud that it woke David from a deep sleep. He grabbed his flashlight and went outside to investigate. To his surprise, there was nothing near the cabin that could be causing the noise. No branches, no animals, nothing. Perplexed, he went back inside. The next day, while hiking, he stumbled upon an old overgrown path he had never noticed before. Curious, he followed it and found a dilapidated, long-abandoned cabin deep in the woods. Inside, he found old tools, decaying furniture, and strange childlike drawings on the walls. That night, the tapping became banging. David, now genuinely frightened, barricaded the door and stayed awake with his rifle. Around midnight, he heard whispering outside the cabin. He could make out fragments of sentences but couldn't understand them. Suddenly, the whispers stopped, and there was a deafening silence. David decided to leave the cabin at first light. As he packed, he found one of the childlike drawings from the abandoned cabin pinned to his door. It depicted a figure standing outside a cabin, looking in through a window. Shaken, he left immediately and never returned. Years later, when David shared his story, he learned that the old path he had found led to a cabin that belonged to a reclusive family who disappeared in the 1940s. The children were rumored to have been seen wandering the woods long after their disappearance. David never found out what the tapping and whispers were, but the experience haunted him for the rest of his life. The second story today is The Phantom Lights. In the summer of 2003, a group of 4 friends, Sarah, Mike, Linda, and Tom, decided to spend a week in a secluded cabin in the Appalachian Mountains. They were looking forward to a week of hiking, fishing, and enjoying each other's company, away from the distractions of modern life. The cabin was charming, with a picturesque view of the mountains and a serene lake nearby. The first few days were perfect. They hiked, swam, and told stories around the campfire. But on the third night, things took a strange turn. Sarah woke up in the middle of the night to see a faint light moving through the trees outside the cabin. She watched it for a few minutes, thinking it was a firefly or someone with a flashlight, but it moved in an unnatural, erratic manner. She woke Mike, who was skeptical but agreed to check it out. They walked into the woods, following the light, but it always stayed just out of reach. Eventually, it vanished, and they returned to the cabin, puzzled but not overly concerned. The next night, the light returned, and this time it was joined by several others, all moving in the same strange manner. Linda and Tom saw the lights too and suggested they were reflections or some natural phenomenon. However, the lights seemed to form patterns and even words, spelling out "leave" in the darkness. This frightened them, and they decided to cut their trip short. As they were packing the next morning, they found strange symbols carved into the trees surrounding the cabin. None of them could decipher the symbols, but they felt an overwhelming sense of dread. They quickly loaded their car and left. A few weeks later, Sarah did some research and discovered that the area where they had stayed was rumored to be haunted by the spirits of miners who had died in a collapse over a century ago. The lights, according to local legend, were the ghosts of the miners trying to warn people away from the cursed land. The friends never returned to the cabin, and the memory of the phantom lights stayed with them, a chilling reminder of their unsettling experience in the Appalachian Mountains. The last story we have today is the abandoned cabin. In the winter of 2016, a young couple, Emily and James, decided to rent a cabin in the remote woods of Vermont for a romantic getaway. They found a cozy, isolated cabin online and booked it for a week, looking forward to some peaceful time together. When they arrived, the cabin was perfect, snow-covered, surrounded by towering pines, and far from any other homes. The first night was magical, with a roaring fire, hot cocoa, and the quiet beauty of the snowy woods. But the second night, things began to feel off. Emily woke up in the middle of the night to a cold draft and noticed that the front door was slightly ajar. She woke James, who checked the door and assured her it was just the wind. He locked it securely, and they went back to bed. The next morning, they found strange footprints in the snow around the cabin. They were human, but barefoot, and led into the forest, disappearing among the trees. That evening, as they were relaxing by the fire, they heard faint music playing somewhere outside. It was an old haunting tune that neither of them recognized. James checked outside, but found nothing. They were starting to get uneasy, but they decided to stay, thinking it was just their imagination. The following night, Emily woke to find a figure standing at the foot of their bed. She screamed, waking James, but the figure vanished. They packed their bags and decided to leave at first light. As they were leaving, Emily noticed something strange on the mantel. An old, dust-covered photo of a couple who looked just like them, standing in front of the same cabin. The date on the photo was 1916, exactly 100 years earlier. They fled the cabin and never looked back. Later they discovered that the cabin had been abandoned for decades and was rumored to be haunted by the spirits of a couple who had disappeared there in 1916. The locals believed that the couple lured visitors to the cabin, trying to relive their final days. Emily and James never spoke of their experience again, but the memory of the haunted cabin in Vermont haunted their dreams, a chilling reminder of their brush with the supernatural.